gold, mate. This is gold. Keep this in, Connor. This is just riffing. This is like Miles Davis has entered the room and he's just dropping some fucking crazy notes.
Raging Bulls.
Okay, so this is technically the second part. Hang on, let me do that again.
Yeah, could you?
You're listening to Two Beers Until Phronesis, a philosophy podcast for students, graduates, and anyone else interested in ideas. Alongside regular guests and friends, we discuss some of life's big questions over a few beers. Enjoy.
So this is technically part 2 of our sports series, but you guys haven't even listened to the first one, so I guess
Well, thanks.
I guess it doesn't matter. So
Who has? Let's be honest.
Yeah, okay. So if you haven't listened
This
to part
time,
1,
it's personal.
if you haven't listened to part 1, it doesn't matter.
Two sports, two
Because neither have we.
Sports Reloaded.
Basically, in the last podcast, we just talked generally about sport and its place in society. Because Zach does athletics. So we just talked a little bit about that and the role that sport had in our lives. So you guys all have different approaches to sport. No, you have some insight into esports. You follow it, at least.
Yeah, I watch some esports.
Yeah, and I thought that would be an interesting way
This is
to
like
take.
a death position. You're like, I know about these sports.
The term you're using, esports, allegedly I do sometimes partake in watching the said sport.
Right, that's good.
I dispute the term esports. I would like that
I
defined.
would like to redefine esports.
And Kieran, you like punching people.
Yeah.
Nothing to do with boxing. You're just a pretty aggressive.
Is that
guy.
Muhammad Ali on your
any
shirt?
man, anywhere in your back
Oh my
garden.
God, it is actually Muhammad Ali on your shirt.
It is.
And in terms of taking the conversation even further, I thought, because you do jiu-jitsu, don't you?
Yes.
Yeah. So I thought we'd talk about that and yoga and how that fits into the
Can we?
definition.
Because I will literally sit here and talk to you about jiu-jitsu for the next 4 hours.
Okay, we'll get onto that at the end.
Please.
So first of all, just the only bit of follow-up I wanted to do the last podcast. No, you had a problem with the definition we had of sport, largely. Or at
Well,
least,
I just have a different idea of what I think
Yeah.
sport is.
because I think we were pretty much in agreement on that last podcast about the whole, how to define sport and stuff. Yet you,
Because I think you looked up a definition of it, if I'm remembering correctly, and it had the physical, had a physical constraint to it. It was going outside and doing physical stuff, and you guys thought, well,
no, yeah,
no, you want it to be a lot more sort of broad than that.
I think a large part of what we were saying was when you're doing philosophy right, it should encompass the whole of your life, and therefore if you're doing sport, you're kind of doing philosophy if you're doing them both right. And I think you found that a bit too broad, and you were going to say something about esports in regards to that. As soon as you said it to me, I was actually agreeing with you, so I went straight back on my point.
Well, that's not good. You need to give me some pushback on this. Because I would say that, so when I think of the word sport,
Kind of
right?
impressionable.
Yeah, so my definition, I would say when I think of sport, I think of like a description of something that the way most people use the word sport, right? It's a descriptive thing. It's if you went to someone on the street and said, I play sports, what does that mean to that person? What does that mean? And that definition does not include, like, if I said I'm a sports person, you're not going to immediately think, oh, you're a chess player, or oh, you're a...
Yeah,
It just isn't part
I guess
of
I guess we weren't really looking for a functional definition. It was more of an idealistic kind of thing. But yeah,
But
I
on
get
top of that, there's
even
a
then
second,
context.
there's a second reason why I also think that, and part of I do actually think that things like esports and things, games like chess and Go and things like that. I do follow chess. I really like watching chess, but I do think that they
games. What's the resistance about the term game? Because you just say games like chess. So I follow games like chess. Do you think part of the esports thing is just a resistance to call it a game? Because it makes it sound trivial.
No, because I think
actually,
game
really
is
complicated.
under descriptive, because a game could mean a game of football. So that's in a way it doesn't separate it at all. So using the word game isn't very useful.
Okay, so I imagine you would say, because I've been playing in a darts team recently, I imagine you would say that's not a sport.
That's a sport.
That's
mate.
a difficult one.
Darts
I
is
think.
legit.
Yeah, I would say darts is a sport. Because it's literally a
You wouldn't say
physical.
you wouldn't say
thing.
it's a game.
Well, this thing is, there's something like what's the one where they have to polish it before when they go to, like bowls or something, where it's
curling.
like curling. That's like something where it's still like very high skill, but in terms of like the exertion of it, or like pool or something like this. There's, you're not like, it's not like running 800 meters or whatever, but there's still a physical activity where it's very sort of cerebellum-y. It's you're using motor skills. There's some physical requirements to it.
I disagree though, because that's quite subjective, because you could argue that you're using motor skills to engage in any game. Just because your body has to recruit more to like play a game of basketball or something, how is it any different to somebody that's rolling a bowling ball down the alley, or somebody that's picking up a chess piece and moving it? I get it, and I kind of understand where you're coming from, but I think it's too subjective to say that there has to be a prerequisite of some sort of physical exertion, because technically you could argue that the emotional and cognitive drain, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but of like playing like a game competitively online, you have to click a lot. It involves a bit of wrist endurance, right? And I know I'm probably being a bit pedantic, but do you see what I mean? If you put it under a microscope, you could make that argument for pretty much any game, I guess.
What I would say is that there are certain physical skills that are involved in sports that are not actually requirements for a lot of these other things. Like, so for chess, you could have no limbs and still play like be the best chess player in the world, right? Okay. Because there would even be someone to move the chess piece, and that wouldn't be like
Paralympians.
Yeah, that wouldn't be like cheating. Yeah, but that's not because like for Paralympic, anyone can play chess, and it's all about your brain, right? And at the end of the day, like even if someone else moves the pieces, that's not cheating, because that's not. It's the point is it's the strategic element of it. It's the cognitive. It's the thing, and like that's a very good point, and I think you're very much correct about the whole cognitive exertion thing, because people who play chess on these for instance like Magnus Carlsen in some of these like grand finals in the World Chess Championships, the amount of calories they're burning through just sat there thinking, just because like it's incredible, like just because the amount of like concentration and like in many cases in things like esports when they're playing video games, the amount of adrenaline, the amount of like things as if it would be similar to watching someone who is like cycling for several miles, because the amount of, which is true. But what I'm thinking about more is not the fact of physical exertion, it's more what is being measured here. Is it the skill of someone's which it has to often involve physicality in sports, because I would say that there are certain like essentially genetic requirements to many sports, in the sense that you're not going to be Mo Farah if you just don't have you're not going to be one of the best in the world at a certain thing if you just don't have like certain physical traits about you. And I think that's just like, whereas if you're into computer game thing or whatever, it's all about the brain, and it's like you can be of any physicality or whatever, and it doesn't that isn't what's being measured at the end of the day.
Someone with carpal tunnel syndrome would have a hard time playing competitive esport games.
Yeah, but people have, and that's the thing.
I think my problem with the definition you're putting forward is it's too subjective, and I get what you're saying. I just wouldn't know where to draw the line, and that for me is problematic.
Well, I think my question is there a line? Is there a line between, and what I was saying with like the whole being about is it just because you don't want to call it a game? That was sort of a way of saying, why not just call it all sports and then just have, because it feels like in my mind
games within sports.
No, not even that. There's like an axis, and there's like games and sports at one end, right? Is that an axis? Oh yeah, Connor's eyes just fucking lit up at the word axis. But it's like, why not just call it all sports and then not have? Because I think when you're talking about darts, is darts a sport? You're trying to place it on that line, right? Yeah. Where you're going like, oh, is it a real sport?
Well, I genuinely thought that
meters,
I genuinely thought that Nye would.
Chess?
I genuinely thought that Nye would regard that as a game, and therefore I was going
you guys are using the word game, but a game like this is a game is something else entirely. Saying a game is a totally different thing. I'm not even talking about games.
I'm talking about
get rid of it. Like get rid of it.
Yeah, sure, I know.
I think sport is a subset of games, right?
Yes,
this is the problem. It's like that's a different thing. It's like there's no game sport spectrum. There is games.
But I thought you were going to put it in the same category as dominoes.
It's kind of like a pub game. I would say sport is a way of categorizing a way that games are used. I would say if something's a game, it's a lot more casual. It's a lot more kind of just purely for recreational purposes. I would argue that somebody that goes along and has a kickabout with their mates with football and they're not really training, I'd say that's more like a game. It's more like, whereas a sport, for me, is when you introduce the competitive element to it.
Right. Now, this is something we threw up in the last podcast, and it would be nice to get your opinions on this. So, do you think it's possible to compete with yourself?
Well, that's what sport is about.
Absolutely.
That's
That's the main point.
I think you're absolutely right. But I don't think in most kinds of situations where you'd be just competing with yourself, it's just a self-to-self thing. There's no social element. I don't think usually we'd be calling that a sport. Like anything that's like a physical activity, how far can you stretch the definition? Something like yoga it's something that requires skill to some extent. It's something that requires commitment and
that's kind of like a practice, isn't it? I know what you mean about the competitive element because no one's winning at yoga. No one's like, whoa.
There might be competitive yoga, and at which point I'd argue that's a sport.
But here's something I was thinking about in between the podcasts, which was the difference between dance and gymnastics.
Yeah.
So obviously we think gymnastics is a sport, but to a large degree.
Dance is more of an art form, though.
Yeah. So what's the difference? I think it's the act of creation. I
would say it's competition. Surely that's just the obvious thing that's separating the two.
But you can compete in dance.
Can compete in dance.
You have dance competitions.
But then it's a sport, isn't
and
it?
you're judged on a routine.
And
if it's dance for the sake of dance, it's not a sport. If it's dance with a competitive lens, then it is a sport.
And that's my argument for where you can take pretty much anything where you have two parties engaging in some sort of activity, be that ridiculously phically demanding.
Yeah. So let's say two people draw a painting and they're both judged on it, and the winner gets a Toblerone. You know, it's I don't know why it's a Toblerone.
Connor's idea of sport.
Yeah, but surely that's
just out a window into your soul, then, mate.
Surely that's a sport, then.
Yeah, but I see because most of my argument
painting.
hinges on the idea of how we use the word sport descriptively. And that what I mean by that is if you go and talk to someone, is it going to be confusing if the whole time you're talking about esports when you use the word sports? Yes. If they don't know what you're talking about and you're not separating the fact that you're talking about a computer game.
With that argument, I guess you could go back to like if you took a time machine and you went back 200 years and you were talking to someone about sport, about a well-established sport of today that didn't exist back then, they would be similarly confused. And I think it's just to do with what progression society makes. So just because it's not been that hasn't come under the umbrella of sport for a long time doesn't mean that it can't kind of adapt.
Yeah, that's exactly what I mean.
Yeah.
So that's the same point you're making there, but you're just talking about it in terms of something that doesn't exist. Whereas I'm saying it's the same thing, but it's just like the set of what people understand as being sport does not include these sort of things.
Correct. Yeah, I would agree with that.
When we talk about it descriptively, and that's part of it. That's why I think the word. And the second point that I wanted to talk about why I also think it's useful to separate things like esports from sports is I actually think it's better for the development of esports, and I'm like a bit of a fan of. I watch various esports. I actually really like stuff like chess and whatever.
Get your mouse pad signed.
But I don't. I think it's better if it's separated, like categorically, from normal traditional sports and whatever. I think not only is it it's growing at a massive pace and it's sort of becoming its own thing, but it has its own culture. There is its own sort of association of like of what it means to be like someone who plays video games for. It's just such a different place, and I don't want to see that like the traditionalism of a lot of the regime of how sport is sort of done, whether that's how the media covers sport and all the rest of it. I don't want to see that same approach to things like esports and things like chess. I like the fact it feels like its own separate thing that has its own sort of and the types of people that it attracts are sort of different. There's a slightly different culture to it. And I think that's a good thing. I don't necessarily think we should be desperately trying to get it into sport and it's a real sport. It's like I don't.
Would that
it's
change?
its own thing.
Would that really? Because like I could argue that in boxing, I can't like if I look at a football fan, I can't stand football fans. I don't like what most of them represent. I don't like the way they view their game. I don't like the way that they. Yeah, I literally football makes no sense to me as a boxing fan. I'm proud of the majority of fans that my sport has. I'm proud of the level of sacrifice that our athletes put into it. So I could argue that I want my sport to be separate from others, but fundamentally it's still a sport, just because it's different.
Yeah, I think when I say it's a sport, I don't literally want people to be going around never saying the word esports and never saying that phrase. I just want there to be a recognition that fundamentally the same thing is going on. That's really what I'm saying. I think we're kind of getting confused between a functional definition, a definition that's going to work in society that we can use in common language, and kind of pinning down the essence of something and talking more conceptually.
I think one thing that, like, a lot of the time when we talk about the semantics of a certain word, I think it is important to think of, that's why I use words like descriptive and prescriptive.
Yeah.
Because this is a really important part in when we talk about words. Are we talking about them through the lens of there being some prescriptive nature to them, in the sense that we have a word and it is prescribed a meaning, or are we talking about the descriptive nature of a word in the sense that we get a word like sport and we ask ourselves, what is the word describing to the average person, rather than this is what the word should be prescribed to mean.
Yeah.
And obviously linguists sort of fall on either side of it, but I would say that the more modern sort of approach now is this sort of descriptive approach to how we talk about language, in the sense that words have their meanings based on how people understand the word, rather than to do with like there being some like actual, like, you know, pure definition of a certain thing that has to be there, a prescriptive meaning, and everyone has to be prescribed this meaning, and words can't change or evolve, or, you know.
In both senses of those terms, though, I still think there's an advantage to separate something like dance from gymnastics, even if it's judged. And the reason I think that is because I think dance is trying to say something outside of the performance. Obviously, there's still that whole notion of art for art's sake, because I think it is art, and I think gymnastics isn't art, because its worth is just to do with what's going on in that room and the being judged. I mean, sure, there's other things. You know, they might want to represent their country. The athlete might be on a personal journey, that kind of stuff, and, you know, might have more subjective meaning. But the actual performance is for the sake of being judged right there and then, whilst a dance can say something beyond that room entirely. And in fact, that is almost the point of the dance. That is the point of the art.
Yeah, but at this point, surely we're
commentary.
conflating dance as like a competitive dancing thing with a dance for the art's sake, because those are already two different things, right? Whereas we're just lumping dancing with competitive dancing as well.
I think you can judge art. You're absolutely right. That's where it gets woolly, because the whole idea of judging art, you then start to box things up, and I think that's the essence of sport. Sport is still expressive, but it's within certain rules. It's all about kind of walking those lines and kind of regulating form. But I think dance is much less so. There's much more room, and it's saying something. It's transformative. It's actually producing something, whilst I think gymnastics doesn't. I mean, that gymnastics is stuck. You can use words like routine much more comfortably in that space.
But just because there's more flexibility in dance, it still has confines, i.e. a dance troupe that will come on stage will be given 5 minutes.
Yeah.
They'll have a piece to work to. Just because, I don't know if you know, but in gymnastics, I forget the type of it. Is it creative gymnastics or expressive gymnastics? There's a category of gymnastics where it's basically like a dance.
Rhythmic.
Yeah, rhythmic gymnastics. It basically is a dance, and that's very expressive.
Yeah, and I think those areas are where there is like a massive blurring. What's the diving one where you can just
Tumbling.
Yeah.
Or like synchronized swimming, when it's the whole point is how good does it look as a display, and it's judged.
Yeah, but I mean, that's
I would say that's a sport.
But it isn't. Yeah, because it isn't saying.
It's an
anything.
aesthetic display that is judged, right?
Yeah,
I think the thing is, like, the judging and the competition thing is actually a really good element. That's a really good way to think about it, is like synchronized. If you were doing like Connor was saying about the painting, if you're just doing a painting, that's very different from doing a competitive painting. And it's like the whole idea of like sport jiu-jitsu, where you're working within rules of a sport to score points and being in a fight.
Did you know?
So those are like two completely different sort of ideas, aren't they?
Yeah, interestingly, the visual arts was actually a part of the Olympics at one stage, but they just couldn't do it because it was people drawing paintings and getting judged, and it didn't really fit with the rest. And
the rules are too fluffy, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
but how do you judge art?
yeah,
He was the best cross hatcher. He was very good at shading.
Yeah.
Because you see, I can when you said that there's a big difference between, like, I'll use synchronized swimming again as an example, like when you judge something like that, I don't think that there is necessarily a big difference between, say, doing that as an art form, as a purely aesthetic thing, and a judge thing. It's just one has some contingencies, as in rules, as how the judges are going to aesthetically judge. Like, but the performance itself can be something that is meaningful or means something, and that could actually be part of the aesthetic judging. It could be like a display that
are you
is
talking about gymnastics or dance now?
Well, I was using the example of synchronized swimming.
So synchronized swimming, you're saying that can say more than just the aesthetic.
Yes.
I think it can say. Are you trying to say it can say more than the competition? So you could have like a personal heroic story about a group of people who overcome like hardships and do like well in training and really push themselves, and also they win the rule based thing.
No, I think
So you've
within
got
the piece.
So you've got the rule based competition, and you've also got the things that they express as like a layer on top.
Yeah,
That's
but
interesting.
the thing, but
That's
the art,
interesting. I don't
the
see
art
it.
that is
They
being
express
expressed
that.
can be something that is
I
actually
get
part of the
what you're
competition.
saying.
Is it
Right?
is it there's a category of like expression, which I think is in like the tumbling and things like that. It's literally like, I know in dancing they have like choreography, so it's like how well did you create the piece, and then also how well did you execute it.
So it's like Strictly Come Dancing, right? It's like
Finding my topic.
they have like a dance or whatever. I haven't really watched it, but they do like a dance and they gets judged. But it's like they can be creatively expressive and doing an art thing, but there's still a judging process where there's a qualitative
Yeah, but they're
thing
judged.
about.
They're judged.
On the execution, but that's like with tumbling.
Yeah, but also the
They're-
creativity as well.
But they're also they're judging creativity. But I don't think there's only so much creativity, and again, that creativity it's only so much it can say in the realm of conventional sport.
But surely that's all art. All art is restricted within some kind of, there's a lot of art out there which is created. That's wonderful art that is created with the restrictions.
I don't
given to
know.
them.
I don't know if a gymnastics routine can be political. I don't think it can say political things. I think a gymnast can. And
Depends on the rules of the
act of a
competition, right?
gymnast, maybe there might be a story behind.
It can say political things if it wants to. If it's part of the competition to have a theme or an expression or something like that, that's again, it's entirely dependent on the theme of the competition.
Yeah,
I don't see where the
if that's
separation
true,
is.
if that's true, I agree. But I maybe the difference isn't so fundamental. But I think at their extreme forms, at least, there is this separation. I'll say that much.
For me, the difference is one being judged or not. And I think you can judge aesthetics on a competition or whatever, and that essentially can become a sport if you've got competing people having but it's all about the restrictions of the particular
Is that
thing.
as in saying like it is a sport if there is a way to win? Almost.
Yeah, I would say if it's
it's like esports, there's a very clear way. Like in Dota 2, for example, like there's a very clear way of which you win. There's no such way. There's not a clear way that you win at like freeform dancing or like painting or whatever. There's not such a clear way.
but if there's a
So
competition,
like
it's still a
If
sport, right?
there's a rule set, I think just because the lines get blurry doesn't mean it's no longer like a sport. It just means that it's a sport that requires really competent judges. Like it just because
there has to be judges.
Yeah, there has to be judges. There has to if it's something that is subjective, if it's something that doesn't have a definitive point scoring system that can be counted just by a computer,
Rules.
precisely.
Rules
Then
that can be understood.
then it would need to have rules that can be understood by humans that can keep track of it.
The more qualitative it gets, I just think it moves away from, like we were saying.
Doesn't mean it has to be good or fair. It just means it's still a competition,
Yeah,
right?
precisely. It's
Yeah.
still a sport.
The judges can be biased as hell,
Yeah.
but it doesn't it's still something that people are competing to get better win over the judges, right? That's because that's the whole point. That's the game.
We're arguing now on the basis that all sports have to be perfectly efficiently judged now. Of course, there's going to
or
be
fair,
there's going to be poor. Yeah, there's going to be poorly judged sports out there. There's going to be sports out there that are
hell,
really
even-
difficult to
There's a
impress the
difference. I
judges
think there's a
with.
difference between unfair and subjective. I don't think that's.
Well, no, I get, but I guess the impression I'm getting from what you're saying is that when the lines are blurred, there's a lot more room for unfairness. There's a lot more room for kind of people to maybe miss out on things because they were putting a lot of passion into it that might not necessarily have met the technical demands.
I literally just think that the routine or the whatever's being done. It's a difference between art and sport is what I'm getting at, and because I think art says things beyond the art.
But I don't think that's important in the definition at all. I think that actually can be part of us. You can still have something saying something beyond it, and it can still be a sport.
You want to watch people's retirements fights, man, in boxing. You will never see so much passion, blood, sweat, and tears go into something.
Yeah, but it's all about winning or the act of participating.
But boxing is judged as well, right?
It's judged.
Yeah.
It's about their legacy. It's about they are putting their heart and soul into it, and it's beyond winning. I've seen plenty of old fighters that go out in their last fight, and they're not fighting to win. They're not fighting. They're not thinking about the rule set. They are thinking about something that goes beyond the sport, something that will immortalize them in the eyes of their fans.
But they do that through the sport, and it's
Precisely, no different to how people use creativity through the sport. It's the same thing. Like you're just taking it that one step further. You're acting within the rule set and then you're making it your own by doing something that speaks to fans and viewers.
I think you're getting bogged down by the difference between having the rule set include the aesthetic aspect of it. So in this example that you're talking about, instead of it being like all the the legacy thing and whatever being separate from so the boxing is the thing that happens, and then on top of that we've got like the guy going in there with his own incentives, his own legacy things he's thinking about. It would be like the actual rule set would include that aspect of aesthetic judgment of it's also like his last fight, and we're also gonna into our consideration of how we're judging this fight, we're going to take into like this is it's this but that's the thing. So that's what we're talking about is that a separate thing, or can a sport? Because I think Connor's point was that you're basically separating, or like one of the main things you're talking about when you're separating aesthetics from sport is that the aesthetics can appeal to some higher theme or have something that means something else above here's a
curveball. What about bodybuilding? How do you separate the aesthetics from that sport? Or it's literally entirely about that. But that's a sport.
Yeah, but I'm not saying things can't look nice and be judged on what they look like. I'm saying the looking nice is saying something else.
How did we get on aesthetics? How did we get on aesthetics? We tried to define sport, and then we spent 3 hours talking about.
Because I'm trying to
separating art and sport.
I'm separating art and sport.
But they do cross over.
Yeah, they did.
Are we agreed on that?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think I may be misunderstanding some of the things that you're saying.
So the difference is the way. Yes, I think to make sure that I understand what you're saying. I think you were interested in how. So you're separating art and sport by saying that art can say something or have some kind of thematic thing outside of that sport cannot.
Yeah, and that is the point. That's what it's being judged on.
Whereas I think
sports through its routine can hit on other things, and like there's obviously a wider context in which that sport is being done. So obviously things get said, but the principle, it's all about that principal point of either winning or losing, or maybe just the act of turning up, or but pushing yourself, competing. But it's beyond all those elements. There's nothing else. There's nothing being created as such.
But the problem is, what if the rule set itself includes the art of the creative and the aesthetic elements? So that's what I'm saying. It's like you can increase that set to include all those aesthetic aspects of it, and then it's still a competition. So the trouble is, it overlaps. That's what I'm saying, is it overlaps if the actual competition itself are those aesthetic criterias. So this is the problem. That's why I don't think that's a useful way to separate art and sport. I don't think it's purely the judged.
I don't think synchronized swimming does that to the degree you want to say it does. I think, like, say if you were judging an art piece, maybe, but then I still think the way in which you're judging the art piece is then fundamentally different to the way you're judging boxing.
Maybe not synchronized swimming itself, because I don't really watch it, but I mean something, again, to go back to like dancing in a competitive environment, what can win over judges is making a more artistic statement in the dance. But so what's happening there is the judges are judging it, so it's part of the competition is the aesthetic expression. So again, the problem is that
then I would just say, I mean, this is subjective, it's semantic, whatever, but I would just say that at that point it ceases to become sport and it becomes art.
Right, but then I think there's lots of sports that include that.
Gymnastics, like, it's a massive one, because it's all about can you do the technical thing, but can you also keep the form? And most of that is about aesthetics. And that, I'd say gymnastics is definitely.
Yeah, but the aesthetics aren't saying anything in the same way that art is.
Why not though?
No, I was going to say why not. I think the passion that that some of these some of these gymnasts put into these performances is unreal. These are people that some of them have come from nothing.
Yeah, sure.
And how is that any different?
That's periphery to
but how is that any different? How is their one chance of being on the platform? Maybe this is their first Olympics. How is that platform of them using their body to convey the fucking passion and energy they have for the sport any different to an artist using a canvas to convey that passion?
It isn't, but I don't think that's what I'm saying.
I still don't think I understand what you're saying. I'm not going to lie.
So what if a dancer is doing a routine, or like a gymnastic routine, and it's supposed to be like, let's say like the one dance thing that I'll know is, like you say, like Swan Lake, and like part of it is like the swan dying, and therefore if there was a competition where someone did that as part of their gymnastic routine, they were showing that in the way they moved. Is that not like a combination of that? Yeah,
that would be really muddy. Yeah, sure.
That's
like I would struggle.
That's like the fine line before it comes.
Yeah, that's a better example. I think,
that's a really good example.
You can include in the criteria that idea of like of like having a theme or something, like if the art itself or the process of creation or something, or setting a theme or having whatever is part of what is part of the competition, in the sense that like if the judges enjoy just the purely like artistic expression of it, and that is part of how they're judging something, then the line just like completely disintegrates, because then I do think there's multiple things where part of it is the aesthetic judgment of it, and those things are still considered sport, where the aesthetics of it are included in the competition process. Whereas if you have something, if you have two identical, again, it's like difficult that I'm not in the realm of dance. If you had two different dances that were identical in every single way, but one of them had a more artistic, expressive theme, and the judges liked that, or that added something to it, or there was something more that it was saying, and that was part of the criteria of the judging.
I agree. One thing I will say is I think those kinds of sports are certainly less conventional, and I think that's why I would choose to separate them in that way, because you're always going to get muddy definitions, but
but I think the problem is trying to separate them that way. Then you have to discard loads of things, or at least you have to start saying, well,
not that many.
Well, I need to make an exception for this and that, and things where there is a qualitative aspect to it.
Again, I can't think of any examples, but like then I would just say they're both. I wouldn't say nothing has to be one or the other. Like we were saying, like games, they can be sport, they can not be sport. It's I think sure.
It's like that, that there was that judge where someone was caught and they were making porn, and they asked the judge to define what porn was. He said, well, I don't know what the definition is. Yeah, but I know it when I see it. It's the sort of like that with sports. We all get a vague understanding of what sports are. And we're sort of...
All right.
Kieran, how long have you been boxing?
I mean, I think technically I did a little bit of like pads and stuff when I was a lot younger, when I was like 14. But I didn't properly start boxing until I was about 19. I wasn't sporty at school at all, so I didn't really click. I didn't click that I was good at sports till a much later age. So yeah, how long?
Now you're Muhammad Ali.
I'm Muhammad Ali wishes he was me.
What do you get out of it? Like, what's the appeal?
It's a tricky question. Ultimately, I love to compete. I love the competitive element of it. But there's a lot you get out of it. Self-betterment.
The whole, because like we said, you're competing with yourself, I guess.
You're competing with yourself, but it's also competing against other people. There's definitely an ego element to it, 100%. Anyone who says otherwise is a liar.
Yeah, I can see that. Do you know what I was in a sports bar the other day. It's a really snaggy little place, actually. It's open till like 6 a.m. And they were showing the UFC. I think it is. Is that the one with the proper scrapping?
So that's MMA.
I was fucking horrified. I've never actually seen it. Like I've heard about it, but like it's just blood and stuff everywhere. It's mental.
Well, I think that's the resurgence because everything's like we live in such a safe, sanitized world, bro. That it's just like we're all looking for that outlet a little bit. So I think that's
that fascination with violence.
Well, yeah, I think it's as we move further away from violence, it becomes like more safe, so we can employ like hyper athletes to experience violence on our behalf.
Yeah, it's quite striking because I mean, I'm
Fight Club-esque.
Yeah, I'm not like
same sort.
Obviously, I'm not like a violent person, but like just I couldn't sort of stop looking. As like
you loved it, mate.
I think the whole I think the Jungian idea of incorporating your shadow comes into it massively. Like the whole.
Why don't you explain that for our?
So I'm not a super cool man that did psychology, unfortunately, but I know a little bit about it. It's the idea that incorporating a little bit of darkness into your life, something that's like a little bit like boxing, a little bit violent, is actually quite good for you. It kind of keeps the wolf from the door, so to speak.
Yeah, because I was going to say the difference between boxing and this stuff, without like writhing around the floor, like blood everywhere. It kind of feels more controlled, and I feel like it's that. I don't know. Would you say it's like a safety valve for like aggression? In a lot of ways.
Well, I'd say the difference between MMA and boxing. A lot of people refer to MMA. I think in a derogatory manner as cage fighting. I hear that used a lot, usually by people that don't understand the sport. It is an art form. MMA is an amalgamation of different combat sports, and it allows people to test their own kind of discipline against each other. So you get people in MMA that are from a boxing background. You get people in MMA that are maybe jiu-jitsu and done a bit of wrestling. It's a great platform for people to test their various martial arts disciplines against each other. I think what you're saying is that your experience with boxing is that it looks a lot more controlled, and that MMA looked quite brutal because there was a lot of kind of like violent, like throwing on the ground. But it's no different in essence. It's a fight with rules. They're the same thing. It's just, if anything, boxing's a lot more dangerous than MMA. I don't know of many deaths in MMA, whereas within the last few years, multiple people have died from boxing. It's sustained trauma to the head and vital organs. It's there. I can show you videos of some horrendously bloody boxing fights, like people getting their like forehead split open and then bleeding and carry on fighting. Like, I think any fighting sport has the potential to look barbaric. It just depends what fight you're watching. If you're watching like a 12-round snooze fest with two people that have pillow punches, yeah, it's not going to look that bad.
Yeah, it's interesting you use the word barbaric when in fact it's about control the whole way through. It's like you not only control in terms of rules and regulations, but control of oneself. You could be relatively strong, I imagine, and just run into a ring, and you're going to get floored straight away if you don't know what you're doing. It's about harnessing that form, I guess, and kind of it's a conversation about boundaries and lines in that sense.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, what are you two? I know you've watched a bit of boxing and MMA. What are your experience with
rubbish? It's so boring.
Fair.
Is that a real opinion?
Yeah.
Go on then.
I am triggered.
No, it's all right. I like watching the compilations, but most of the time it's just like a bit of walking around the ring, and that.
I will admit sometimes. Yeah. Like,
do you ever watch it? You're like,
I think we watched a big fight, and it was just.
Yeah.
In fact, I was
Joshua.
I was watching one in that sports bar the other day, and it was just like big build up.
I think it's also
it lasted
like,
about 8 seconds.
It's like access. You have to, and this is definitely something I get with jiu-jitsu. Like you go, oh, they're just on the floor, and it's like I can't access the boxing fight to like understand what's going on because I don't have that threshold. Same as I used to watch Nai play Dota and just be like, oh, this is fucking shit. It's just the camera whizzing around. And then like when you actually understand the mechanics a little bit, you're like, okay, that's really clever what you did there.
Yeah,
and
it's like listening to classical music or prog music.
The deeper you go down, you're like, wow, there's actually some crazy fucking layers of that.
Aesthetic appreciation.
Until it becomes like you were saying, like an art form. Like
you
can
learn how to appreciate a certain thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's the same with sport, isn't it? It doesn't have to be just with art and media where you perhaps some films or some music or whatever, sometimes someone can mention something to you or tell you something about it or something interesting you didn't know about it. And that can unlock a way for you to view it new and enjoy it. Whereas with sport, I think the same thing can happen where if you can understand some of the technicalities of what's going on and like appreciate some of the skill that's going on and some of the, how things are being sort of going on, you get much more out of it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the most you can get out of it is when it starts to inform your identity and you can actually resonate with it on a personal level. And like, I was interested in your comments earlier about football. Like, I think that personal kind of resonation can get a little bit too far in football.
Where it subsumes you. Yeah. Where you become, it's tribal identity.
It's like, that is me on the pitch. It's not you, mate.
My team.
It's like we scored. No, you didn't score. They did. Because you never find that in boxing. It's always this appreciation for the fighter. It's like.
Are you sure about that?
It does. It does happen. It does happen sometimes. There's a bit of tribalism between the camps. So between trainers and their boxers and their cut men and that. I've seen various scraps break out over like a late punch where the coach will pile in and that. So there is still elements of tribalism, but with the fans, definitely. They don't refer to themselves as, oh yeah, I sparked out Vlad Klitschko last night. They don't quite do that. I think the point, just going back to the point,
football teams are regional as well, which I think has a massive impact. To be fair, because they're sort of clubs and places and things.
I mean, you go tell me.
Obviously, there's different leagues.
Do boxers represent countries? They do, don't they?
In amateur boxing, yeah. So boxing's an Olympic sport. So that. Amateur boxing at the Olympics isn't massively popular as you would think. I mean, like as a boxer, I watch it, and I know other boxers that watch it, but I don't know of many people in the mainstream that watch it. But there are occasionally these momentous fights which are to do with the way they market it as being country against country. So I think a great recent example Manny Pacquiao versus Floyd Mayweather. There was definitely a lot of tribalism there. So Manny Pacquiao's a Filipino boxer, and he had like the backing of the whole of the Philippines behind him, and they just are diehard fans of Manny because he's done so much for the country. But yeah, there was definitely elements of the Philippines versus USA and that. So I think tribalism can come out in any sport. I'm not a football fan by any stretch of the imagination, like I said earlier, but I must admit, during the World Cup of last year, I got massively caught. Wait, was it last year or was it the year before?
Well, it was coming home, wasn't it?
2 years ago.
Yeah, fuck me, was that 2 years ago? Wow, yeah, but it was coming home, right? And we all got involved in it.
Is that when we went to the pub?
Me and I went to the pub. And this was, we were like fucking David Attenborough on a safari because it was so fucking weird. Like I was just stood there going like, oh look, and it's like, I don't know, it just doesn't mean anything to me. And I think a lot of it is like indoctrination, like you're saying about regional. It's like, yes, I was a Hammers fan, and you will be a Hammers fan, and your identity is this, and it's almost like a religion replacement.
Zach agreed a little bit when we did the last podcast about this whole tribalism stuff and the resonating. Somehow, the team of England or whatever, or your city or whatever, are supposed to represent you somehow.
Well, one thing I will say is you do get more. I would, at least this is an argument. I know not this doesn't apply to everyone, but I say for the most part, you get more out of watching something that's competitive when you really root for a particular team, and that becomes sort of your team. And it doesn't mean that like you're making some rational choice as to pick the best one.
How do you believe that? It seems to me like a belief. That's like saying,
yeah, it's a belief.
It's like saying you get more out of a religion if you believe it. Well,
no. It's sort of
it?
like you're throwing in your chips with a certain. It's like it's difficult to. But if you have a team that you really enjoy and you know about the players, you know about their personality, and you want them to win. That's the main thing. You want them to win. You're like even if they're maybe the underdogs or whatever.
How do
because you get that great feeling when they do, right? And you feel sad when they lose, and like that sort of emotional roller coaster is part of the fun. It's not as fun, maybe for some people, I'm sure it is just fun, like picking whoever the statistically more likely team to win all the time.
I get it's not as fun, but like how are people actually doing? What is the appeal? Like,
the appeal is you get it's sort of like you just pick one and you go after what if like the thing is if you watch sport you are slowly acclimatize to the different teams, to the players, and like you'll get like you'll be like, oh, I do like that player. I've been watching him for a while. I've seen him go through this like arc of these few teams or whatever. Obviously, I'm maybe talking more from watch because I watch esports stuff, but like this applies perfectly to like football and whatever, where you're talking about like player transfers and whatever, and you're like following a player. And you're like, oh, I remember watching him. And you get there's a sort of storyline to it, and then you watch your team, and it's like, oh, I was sort of like supporting them when they had a few losses, and then suddenly they like win against like all odds and whatever, and that feels great because you've sort of watched these people go through this story of improvement, and it's in a way there is something about rooting for someone and almost having this vicarious sort of enjoyment of the game through some of the people playing it.
Yeah, my dad and my granddad were season ticket holders for Hereford, but I think after spending that money, I think that just got that investment from
it's gambler's fallacy. I've sunk my money into a season ticket. Therefore, I love Hereford.
People can find a passion for an athlete or a team at any point in their life, really, because you get these born-again fans, and it's usually at a point when they are watching either some sort of marketing material or an actual live game or a conversation they've had with someone, and something will resonate with them as a person. And I think in boxing, you see it all the time. So a great recent, well, there's been a few, but Tyson Fury versus Deontay Wilder. Deontay Wilder was very much marketed as the bad guy, as the kind of villain, and it became that sort of archetypal battle between hero versus rogue. And like Tyson Fury got knocked down in the 12th round, and everyone thought that was it, and everyone was on the edge of their seat, and it was really dramatic. And he got back up, and everyone thought he should have won the fight, and everyone was outraged when he didn't, and he gained new fans.
It's being part of a story. With all these big like grand like antipodes, like the hero and the this and the that. Yeah, I can see the appeal. It's just why choose one over another. It's kind of where I'm at. It's just like
for the story, because you can't have a story unless you have a protagonist, right? That's the point.
Yeah, but
otherwise you're just watching things happen. There's
but
no
everyone is a protagonist.
No, they're not.
Choosing a protagonist. They're all protagonists. All the fighters are protagonists.
No, because you picked one to follow and picked one
that's the point.
Watch their story.
They're all protagonists until you pick one. So
your idea is how do you pick them? Okay, so there's
You just watch it for a while.
there's people
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah.
It's Harry Potter. You don't choose your team. Your team chooses you.
there's people that love Floyd Mayweather because he's an insanely he's arguably one of the best boxers of all time. He's incredibly rich. He lives an incredibly lavish lifestyle. He doesn't give a shit. He wins, and people would pay to watch him lose or win. The people that don't like him tend to be the people that like the underdogs. They prefer.
Oh yes. So I guess the personalities come
precisely.
through and you resonate with a particular personality.
And it will resonate with the different personalities, i.e. people that like success, people that are like hustlers, people that are all about winning. They don't give a fuck about emotions.
But not only that, but sometimes it might be they just appreciate the skill. They're like, this guy is so skillful. I just like watching him as a display of skill.
I don't like Floyd as a person. I don't like
you're
Floyd.
saying that's a waypoint.
Yeah, so you might start watching, like, you might start watching something like, oh, I'm interested in this sport or whatever. I would like to watch people who are like the best in the world watch, and you gravitate towards certain people who are like doing incredibly impressive displays of certain skill.
Like an entry point,
and you start
and
watching them, and and you just keep, I want to keep watching that person because I was really enjoying watching him, and that's another way you get into it. Right?
It's interesting because my experience with sport is that I as I was saying in the last podcast, I do play it in some capacity, but I've never followed sport in any capacity. At least, like, I've only just appreciated it objectively. Like, oh, these people are really skilled, and like, I do get behind certain people, like, especially if I'm in the right atmosphere. But I've never followed like a club or a team in the long run through their career, or like been that interested after the spectacle. Like, in amidst the spectacle, it's like, yes, I can get behind a particular player at that point, like. Especially if someone's giving the rundown, like, oh, this guy's that, and this guy represents that kind of idea, and this is why people like him. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to root for this guy. And I go, yeah, and I'm cheering. But then it's so fleeting, because after that, I'm just like, no.
I get that. Is that maybe because you've already resigned yourself to not wanting to be involved in it, though? Like, subconsciously?
Like I said, maybe it is subconscious, but consciously.
Well, part of it is you have to keep coming back to it for it, because like if you're not just if it's just something that you become submersed in for a while, and you're clearly not coming back to it later at your own agency, then clearly it's not in, you're not going to get into it because you have to be attracted to it in some sense.
Yeah, like I said, I don't dislike sport. I do dislike certain elements of football culture, and that where the vicarious stuff gets too far and it always becomes like some kind of weird dogma, and it is like you were saying, a religion replacement, and you probably know how I feel about those kinds of things. But yeah, like it's not that I don't want to. It's that I just haven't, and I've never existed in that space to be able to follow a team. But yeah, I've nothing against sport.
No, I get that. I think recently for me, I used to find watching, and I'm sorry to keep going back to fighting, but that is why you dragged me here, to be fair.
Yeah.
But until recently, within the last few months, I'd say I used to find ground fighting, so like jiu-jitsu, wrestling and stuff. I used to find that really boring. I did not get into it at all. But this fucker, I'm pointing at Sam, made me start watching it a bit more.
Pointing at Nye, who's got a brown belt.
I can't remember what point it was, but there would have been a point where I saw something in a video or in a fight, and I can't remember where it was, but it just resonated with me. And I'm getting well into it. I'm like starting to slowly train like a little bit of jiu-jitsu on the side now, and I'm really enjoying it. Whereas before I didn't. And I like watching it. So yeah, it can come without warning sometimes. Even something that moment where like you decide that you're really finding a sport interesting, even though you've given it chances in the past. All it takes sometimes is just to see a certain set of events unfold that fit in with the way you view the world, I guess.
That's a really important one, is the way you view the world, because it's like in all games, like you have the same personality. Remember you were talking about like driving instructor. I was telling piss out of Kieran saying he's got no map awareness, like on Dota or League, and then your driving instructor was saying like, oh yeah, you haven't got a good long-term awareness, and it's like all sports are like a microcosm for what you're doing. So it's like how you box, how you do jiu-jitsu is like how you do anything, and I think it's just quite interesting how you can learn so many lessons from doing sport. It's like I don't know, having your back taken and getting like flanked in jiu-jitsu is like, it's a very real, it's a very like physical.
It's like an expression of your personality. It's like distilled into a form.
Yes.
Distilling your identity into a very specific form.
Well, it's like, and people often talk about jiu-jitsu and a lot of martial arts as like a physical philosophy. So it's like, there's like certain points where you could be like, you can talk to someone about, let's say you're having a conversation with someone, and it's like, they've got a point, you've got a point, and you're like, okay, well, what I'm actually going to do is not just argue with them, because at that point I'm resisting strong against strong, and I'm like pulling against a strong arm something. What I'm actually going to do is go for like a sweep or like a flank, which is like doing something slightly unexpected. And it's like you can take the things you learn in a sport and then put those on top of your real life. So I think it's just like there's so many things to learn from being engaged in sport.
And I'd say vice versa.
Yeah, because
I think
they're both the same, and it's like that whole Musashi thing that I fucking bummed that quote of like, when you know the way broadly, you see it in all things.
Yeah, I was being reminded of Sun Tzu at the moment. Yeah, the way, it's a lot of similar things.
It's so fucking true. It's like once you see it in one sphere, you're just like, cool, that 100%. It's like an overlay. You can take your filter, you can take your jiu-jitsu filter and your Dota filter and your whatever filter, and just overlay them with all the things that you're currently doing.
I agree, but I don't think when I play in my darts team that I'm doing that.
Maybe.
Yeah,
I think you can look at it on like a trip.
I suppose it depends how woke you want to be.
Yeah.
It depends. Like, it's like if you're getting up and you're really going, and it's like you have to. I think for that you have to be properly living that as part of your life. You have to be really,
that's the
so like
thing.
if you were getting up and you were training, it's like
that classic
the
difference
best people who are darts, like Andy Fordham at darts.
Yeah.
He wakes up and he has a philosophy about darts. Like he's fucking woke about darts, and I'm sure he thinks about dart problems and then applies them to other aspects of his life.
The difference between a footballer and somebody who plays football.
Someone who kicks about the park and someone who can read the game is probably completely different.
Yeah, I've said that before about like why none of us four are actual philosophers. It's like,
you can look at it at an arbitrary level as well. I think like in boxing, I've always been very nimble and agile, yet in real life, I'm a clumsy fucker with no peripheral vision, it would appear. Yet, like, I think sometimes sports, you can definitely find bits of yourself that don't appear to exist in other walks of life. But I'm not sure whether that's just because I haven't discovered it yet.
Self-discovery, yeah.
Yeah, precisely. And I'm still kind of...
I guess it's all about pushing yourself and challenging yourself. And again, it's a conversation about boundaries and lines. It's about sometimes going over those lines and testing your opponent, testing yourself.
Yeah. So one thing I wanted to ask you guys then is, how do you feel about yourself since you followed the journey of your sport? So Nye, there would have been a point where you didn't do esports, and you've obviously gone on a journey of playing the game yourself, maybe not competing in esports, but playing the game yourself and observing it more. Sam, I know it wasn't until like a couple of years ago that you started jiu-jitsu. How do you guys feel that has had an effect on your life, and what has it made you see differently?
I don't know, it's made my penis a lot longer. just noticeably, like drastically longer. You just get that and you just look down and you go, fuck.
Yeah, to be fair.
That's actually just like, it's an inconvenience.
So this is why boxing's inferior, because I'm still rocking the 2-inch Wonder.
Do you think it's made you any sort of more socially conscious?
So much calmer.
Yeah.
Because nothing phases you at all after you go.
Because you know that you can karate chop it.
Well, no. Because you're now used to a guy who's 40 kilograms stronger than you and has been doing jiu-jitsu for 2 years trying to kill you. And it's jiu-jitsu is like, I was talking to Kieran about this the other day, when you tap, that's like, it's easy to do that in training and be like, oh, that's a tap. But like, if you realize if you don't do that, you're going to die. Like, you're going to be choked unconscious. I mean, they'd just be unconscious, but like, if the guy kept choking, you would die. And if you don't tap from an armbar, you'll have your arm broken at joint. If you don't tap from a Kimura, you will have your shoulder wrenched from the socket. And it's like nothing phases you when like if I'm teaching, there's like a kid being like, oh, being a dickhead, you're like, it's absolutely no factor, because no one is trying to strangle you to death. And
you gain that sense of perspective.
Well, yeah, it gives you so much perspective. And it's also like, the only way, if someone starts strangling you to death, you want to freak out. And that's completely the wrong thing to do.
Real talk.
The right thing to do is to stay calm and to be able to be comfortable in that horrible situation.
Yeah,
and therefore think. Yeah. So it's just like, that's just a fucking crazy takeaway. And also, it's like, I remember people talking about jiu-jitsu for self-defense, and they go like, so much of the problem about self-defense is, let's say you're being grabbed for the first time, you have that massive adrenaline dump and you have this freak out because you've been grabbed by a stranger who's trying to hurt you. Well, if someone grabs me now, I'm like, oh, okay. You sort of have that like you're anesthetized to it. You've had that sort of build up from going from, you know, like white belt patty cake to someone actually trying to kill you. So it's like you've already got that. What is it? Is that like that thing where you immersion therapy, isn't it? Where you just have like a little bit and a little bit and a little bit.
Systematic desensitization.
That's what it is. No fucking way would I be able to remember that. But you have like a little bit and a little bit and then whatever Nye said. But yeah, I think that's what I've learned a lot from jiu-jitsu. And also just like discipline, just turning up when things are going shit, just turning up. And then those are usually the times you learn the most.
I agree.
Nice. Do you think you learn anything from esports, for competitive gaming?
Or from playing?
Because you're pretty good at competitive gaming. That's
Or it's like you're like
well,
top,
or at least you were.
I mean, like in terms of like, yeah, I mean,
like
in
top
Dota,
0.1%, which is fucking
whatever.
mental.
Yeah, I can't remember what it is. Yeah,
It's
for
generally
being modest.
generally
whatever I
nuts.
was when it ranked. But yeah, it's. I mean, I don't play anymore, but I was trying to think the whole time. It sounds like, is there anything I've? The difficulty is, it's like I don't think there was any, especially with like playing stuff. I don't think I ever went into it for any of the same things. For me, it was always like a time vacuum. It was an escapist thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never had the attitude of going into games or whatever and going, I want to be the best at this. I want to be really good. I've never actually done that. I think the problem is
you were competing though.
Yeah, because it's this sort of like part of the game. You sort of like, it was always like different things I wanted to do. I was like, can I get away with this? And we're still with. That's like more what I wanted to do.
Well, there you
like,
go.
So
Pushing
in a game,
boundaries.
yeah, I would be like,
yeah.
can I do this really stupid thing in this game, or can I like max out this thing, or try to do this thing and get away with it? And it would always be like, I would never. And so it's difficult to say, but I definitely like. I mean, in terms of like just playing it, it does obviously certain skills. You can see how like getting better at like making complex decisions in a difficult place can, you know, it gets you better at that, I think. But I mean, overall, I think for a lot of people, what they probably get out of sport is something I get from playing instruments, which is you realize that if you just put in loads of time to practice and keep going at something, and you know, just keep putting consistent time into something, figure out the strategies for getting better at something, you can eventually just get better at it. And I think the trouble is, because I've been doing that with instruments since I was very young, I kind of already, I think that didn't really apply for me when I went into trying to do I was never really competitive or wanted to get better at it. I was like, this isn't to me like a skill that I want to get better at or care about.
What about the vicarious stuff then? So when you're watching certain teams compete, do you see yourself in those teams in that sense?
No, I just really like the story.
Yeah.
It's like watching a film. It's like I have teams I like watching. I'm like, oh, I hope they win. You know, and I go watch it and I'm like, oh, this is cool. And like sometimes it's like, oh, it's an impressive display of skill or whatever, and that's satisfying to watch sometimes. But for the most part, no, it's just enjoyment. And I think that's probably why I pretty much only watch esports now. Like in terms of I watch a bit of Dota and a bit of StarCraft and a bit of I like stuff like chess as well, which is kind of a tangent. But you know, I like following that sort of stuff partly because it's an impressive sort of skill thing, but also, you know, I wouldn't watch it if I wasn't doing the thing where like, oh, I like this guy. Oh, I do like watching Magnus Carlsen curb stomp people. It's fun, you know. And it's just like stuff like that it's just a purely sort of enjoyable thing. I don't know if there's really anything in there about, you know, whether I'm like vicariously trying to like put myself in anyone's place or like I don't see that at all really. I think
there's at least a resonation.
Yeah, I just kind of enjoy it. It's just like I want them to succeed because it's like, oh, you know, I've sort of, you know, I've been watching somebody since they were like a nobody, and you're like, oh, you know, you have some sort of investment in like watching their sort of arc, and yeah, maybe you could say that is perhaps a commentary on our own innate desire to want to go from nothing to somewhere, you know, and watching that progression in someone else, yeah, you could maybe say that perhaps is a reflection of the same thing you get when you watch a film where it's a story of an underdog coming out of nowhere and succeeding. You get that feel-good feeling from that in the same sort of way. It's like you mentioned, sort of archetypal in a way. It is that watching that success story play out and sort of seeing that in yourself or seeing that sort of encouragement and and I guess it appeals to that universal sense of wanting the world to function in terms of if input is skill or like time they put into something and all that sort of thing, then the output would be success, which it not always is that clear, but we like that as a story. We like that as a meta narrative of how the world should be. We want that sort of clear line through.
Yeah, well, so obviously you guys have been saying that kind of sport influences you and you influence the sport in that kind of cyclical relationship. In terms of how it informs your life and your identity and some of the things you learn from it. But I think that's true on a kind of macro level as well. Like the whole society shapes sports and sport shapes society. It's kind of a synchronized conversation going on. But I think in that sense, it really appeals to people that are more kind of disenfranchised for the reason you were just saying. If you could just do this thing, then you would get that thing. And it's like the success story element, and I think that's why it has that really, really broad appeal, because it's just like it's such a clear example of people doing good, making the best for themselves. I think that's why a lot of people resonate with it, and I think that's why it attracts certain personality types.
Do you watch darts now?
I've watched a bit.
Do you appreciate it more now that you play more darts? In the sense, you're watching it and you're enjoying it more because you're going, "Oh, that was impressive."
Here's the thing:
you can sort of think about like, "Oh, I would really struggle to be hitting those triple 20s."
I think more people play darts than watch it. Whilst I think the opposite is true of football, and I think that's because darts is a terrible sport to look at. It's not a spectator sport, really.
I don't know, mate. It's pretty fucking good.
You've obviously never been to Ali Pali and got rat ass, mate.
You get those 180s and you just wave your
but like in the pub, it's a nice activity to be doing. It's a nice way to kind of meet people, and it's a thing to do, and it's got that rich history as well. There's always been a dartboard in the pub.
It's accessible. It's very accessible.
It actually came, I think, from. Were you telling me this the other day? Something about archers
practicing archery.
Yeah, in a pub, or throwing knives or something. Somebody told me that. It might be bollocks, but
probably not me then. I don't remember that.
Throwing axes.
But no, it's kind of evolved from those kinds of things. And
I think I was just saying I want to do some axe throwing because it looks fun. Like
you do archery now, don't you?
I fuck around with a bow. Yeah, it's fun. My sister had one, and then she fucked off, and then she left the bow around. So I was like, oh, okay, you go shoot things. Nice.
Oh, you Lars Larson.
Has that awakened something primal in you?
I think that there is because it's like there is something. Just if you put someone in a room with some paper, the first thing they do is fucking throw that paper. People just love throwing stuff at things.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if it's like a fucking dartboard, an axe, or archery, or a kick.
Does that say something about me that I would try to fold it into something interesting or make something cool out of it instead of fucking lob it?
No, you like to think,
turn it into the best paper aeroplane ever.
Sorry, you like to.
That's still going to be lobbed.
Yeah,
that's true. Yeah,
that's
turning it into something that's better to lob.
Well, that's just like a poncy version of throwing paper. And we all know the best paper aeroplane is a screwed up ball. It's the best paper aeroplane.
Well, when we saw
it real far.
Sam and I went to see Jordan Peterson give a talk in Oxford going back like 2 years ago, I think, and he gave
Big Daddy.
Yeah, trust. He gave a really, really interesting talk about hitting the target. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
When he was talking about how we as humans have this obsession with hitting the target, and it's why, like, because he gave the example of like rifle shooters who go hunting, and it's like
do the voice. Come on, do the voice.
No, don't do the voice. Don't do the voice, please.
Well, the thing about rifles.
Keep doing that.
Oh, you should just be like, today we've got a special guest. It's Dr. Jordan Peterson. Oh, well, I just got out of rehab.
Oh my God. No.
I just smashed a lot of opiates.
But I
just make a note to delete that bit.
Yeah. But no, I wanted to go back though, because what you said about people doing good with stuff, I think you can observe that with so many sports. It's people using sports as a platform to do good. And again, I'll use my sport as an example. My first boxing team was run by the Police Activities League, PAL, in San Jose, California. And it was an incredibly rough neighborhood. It was a gang neighborhood. And they provided a place for young men to come and learn a discipline, learn something that would keep them fit, learn to control their aggression and their emotions, give them a bit of responsibility and allow them to compete in a safe, competitive environment.
Yeah.
That was amazing. I think it was fantastic what they did. In UK now, we've got stuff like Gloves Up, Knives Down, which is an initiative which is trying to get kids off the streets, less involved in knife crime, and more into boxing gyms.
Yeah, this is why I asked you whether it was kind of a safety valve for you. And I like when you were saying about people in a pub want to lob stuff. I honestly think that's why the dartboard exists.
Yeah.
It's a control thing. It's like,
Yeah.
here's the place where you can lob things in the corner.
And it comes back to integrating the
just
shadow
stop-
again, isn't
stop
it?
you
It's
flying
like
tables.
we have these urges. Let's do it in a safe way. And I think
I don't know if it's so much that, because otherwise people like, it's the same thing with like playing cards or like having a pool table. It's just a dartboard's cheaper. I don't know if it's necessary. I think perhaps people just want an excuse to do something while they're having a chat and a drink.
Yeah, but if you gave me the
It's your
choice,
boy Irving Goffman, the least cited
Yeah.
book of all time. It's secondary behaviour.
Yeah, just having an excuse,
Like I'm doing with this
having
pen.
something that's occupying you instead of just directly having it. You know, trying.
yeah, but if you gave me the choice of throwing a dart or playing shove halfpenny in a pub,
Oh, I don't know. That's
I would throw a dart. You know,
Yeah, but what about having a game of poker or something? I suppose. Well, I don't know. 'Cause do
Yeah.
you like any of those kind of games? I like poker.
I
but
like poker. Yeah, I like card games, but I guess pool and snooker and darts attract me more. I think it's because they're more kind of physical, and you get to. I don't know.
Who's your boy who wrote *Sapiens*? Is Yoval Hari, and he talks about how like we all have throwing things because that was what saved us from. That's what allowed us to walk out of the trees. So we came down from. Some of his science around there, I think, was a little bit shady,
a bit sketchy in
So
places.
some of that book I read, I was like, but it's a good couple of years old. But he's saying that the thing that allowed us to sort of be like plain dwelling animals is the fact that if a big fucking adversary would come, our great descendants would throw stones at it.
Giant
And we,
sloth.
if a giant sloth came and he was like, we're going to eat things, apparently that's one of the things we do is we'd be really good at throwing stones really hard, really fast.
I think
And
as
that's,
just as a
built into
like
us.
like Merry
as a
and Pippin.
random rant, like it always annoys me when someone goes, "The one thing that allowed us to evolve, the one thing." It's always
sorry,
like there's so many.
Sorry,
yeah,
I
like,
did I
yeah.
say the one thing?
Well, no, I don't know if you were like saying that he was saying that the entire reason.
Well, no,
why
there's
you know,
many,
fended
there's
off
many
predators.
things. That's one
It's
of
just
them.
yeah,
isn't
because
it?
there's just so many things where it's like when they're like, oh, and it was like fire was the thing that allowed us to like survive against
Brazilian
predators and all like
jiu-jitsu,
this. Or
so they could
clumsy,
wrestle the.
yeah.
When the lion jumped on them, he used fucking BJJ to break his neck.
Right, I'm going to shoot off there. So
Oh. That's fucking hell of a way to end that section. All right, boys, we're throwing down then. Sport's cool. Darts is not a sport.
I'm
Bye-bye.
off, then, bye.